The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around Elijah Brooks's wrists with a sharp final click, the metal biting deep enough to leave immediate welts against his skin. Red and blue lights strobed across the perfectly manicured lawns of Cedar Crest Estates, turning the quiet, moneyed suburb into something that looked and felt like a crime scene. He stood on the front porch of his own home, treated like a common burglar for the simple act of trying to unlock his front door. The young officer who had shoved him against the brick didn't know who he was dealing with. He had no idea the man in the tailored suit, the man now cuffed and breathing hard against the cold masonry, was the district attorney of Westchester County, New York. In places like Cedar Crest Estates, silence was a luxury purchased with multi-million-dollar mortgages and carefully maintained appearances. The neighborhood was a sprawling collection of Tudor-style mansions, impeccably trimmed hedges, and long driveways lined with mature oaks. For Elijah Brooks, buying a house here had never been just about real estate. It was proof. Proof that a kid raised in the hard, unforgiving blocks of Chicago's South Side could claw his way through law school on scholarships and pure stubborn will, rise through the ranks as a prosecutor, and become the first black man ever elected to the office of district attorney in the county's history. It was 11:52 p.m. on a Friday in mid-October. The autumn air carried the sharp scent of wood smoke and the first real threat of frost. Elijah had just closed out an 80-hour week. His office was buried in a high-stakes prosecution against a powerful local organized crime syndicate, a case that had left him mentally and physically drained. He pulled his black sedan into the long driveway, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the sudden quiet. The neighborhood was dead silent except for the soft crunch of fallen leaves under his polished Oxfords as he walked the stone path to the front door. Briefcase in one hand, suit jacket draped over the opposite shoulder, tie loosened hours earlier. He looked every bit the exhausted public servant finally coming home. When he reached the grand double oak doors, he reached for his keys and found the pocket empty. He checked the jacket. Nothing. A flicker of irritation crossed his face as he remembered leaving the keys on his desk at the courthouse in the rush to leave. His wife, Claire, was out of town visiting her mother in Philadelphia. The house was dark. Elijah wasn't worried. He had installed a top-tier smart lock system. He pulled out his phone to open the door remotely. The screen flashed a low battery warning and died in his hand. Perfect, he muttered, a tired half-smile touching his mouth. He knew the backup plan. Claire had insisted on a spare physical key hidden in a magnetic lockbox under the heavy stone planter at the far edge of the porch. Elijah set the briefcase on the welcome mat, rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt, and knelt beside the planter. The stone was cold. He had to wedge his arm underneath at an awkward angle to feel for the box. He was so focused on the key that he never noticed the headlights turning onto the cul-de-sac. He never heard the low, predatory hum of the police cruiser rolling slowly down the street. The first warning he got was the blinding white blast of a high-intensity spotlight slamming into his back. The light was so fierce it bleached the color out of everything, turning the red brick into a sterile, clinical white. A jolt of pure adrenaline punched through his chest. "Step away from the door and keep your hands where I can see them." The voice came through the cruiser's PA system. Young, aggressive, already vibrating with the kind of nervous energy that turned ordinary stops into tragedies. Elijah recognized that tone instantly. It belonged to a cop who had already decided the encounter was going to be a fight. He took a slow breath and did not move suddenly. 20 years in the system, first as a defense attorney, then as a prosecutor, had taught him exactly how thin the ice was beneath a black man's feet on a dark porch in a wealthy, mostly white neighborhood. Kneeling by a door at midnight was a textbook recipe for catastrophe. "I live here," he called out, voice calm, resonant, deliberately free of panic. He raised both hands slowly to shoulder height, palms open and empty. "My name is Elijah Brooks. I'm the homeowner. I locked myself out." The cruiser door slammed. Heavy boots hit the asphalt and came across the lawn fast. "I said turn around slowly. Keep those hands up." Elijah pivoted with careful deliberation, squinting against the spotlight. The officer approaching him had one hand resting on the butt of his unholstered sidearm. The name tag read, Brennan. Officer Kyle Brennan, 26 years old, 2 years out of the academy, already carrying a reputation inside the precinct for being proactive, the polite departmental word for overly aggressive. "Officer," Elijah said, keeping his voice authoritative but non-threatening, "there's been a misunderstanding. I'm trying to get the spare key to my own house. If you lower the light, I can show you my ID." "Shut up," Brennan snapped, closing the distance. His eyes jumped nervously between Elijah, the dark windows of the house, and the briefcase on the mat. "Turn around, face the wall, and interlock your fingers behind your head. Do it now." A cold knot of anger tightened in Elijah's gut. He was the chief law enforcement officer of the entire county. He signed the budgets and authorized the warrants for the department this young man worked for. Out here in the dark, under the glare of a squad car spotlight, none of that mattered. Out here, he was just a target. Across the street, a porch light flicked on. Margaret Ellison, 72 years old, president of the Cedar Crest Homeowners Association, the woman who had almost certainly dialed 911, was peering through her velvet curtains with a phone pressed to her ear. "Officer Brennan," Elijah said carefully, reading the name tag as the young cop stepped onto the first porch stair. "I am going to comply, but I want you to listen. My wallet is inside that leather briefcase on the mat. My driver's license has this exact address on it. I am the district attorney of Westchester County." Brennan let out a harsh, dismissive scoff. He climbed the remaining steps, posture rigid, hand still hovering near his weapon. "Yeah, right, and I'm the mayor of New York. I got a call about a prowler matching your description creeping around the properties. Face the brick, now." Elijah hesitated for a fraction of a second. Every instinct honed by years of commanding courtrooms screamed at him to put this rookie in his place. But he looked into Brennan's eyes and saw the erratic twitch of the jaw, the shallow, rapid breathing. The kid was scared, running on bias and raw nerves. One sudden movement toward the briefcase and a gun might come out. Swallowing pride to stay alive, Elijah turned and placed his hands flat against the cold, rough brick of his own home. "Spread your legs." He complied. Before he could brace, Brennan kicked his right ankle outward, forcing him into a wider, more vulnerable stance, then drove a forearm hard into the center of his back. The breath exploded from Elijah's lungs as his chest slammed into the wall. "Hey, take it easy," he grunted, genuine anger finally cracking through. "There's no need for this level of force. I'm completely cooperative." "Stop resisting," Brennan shouted. The phrase automatic, drilled in so deep he used it even when a man was standing perfectly still. The cold metal of the first cuff snapped viciously around Elijah's left wrist. The ratcheting sound rang out loud in the quiet night. The second cuff locked a moment later. He was handcuffed on his own porch. "Officer, you are making a monumental mistake," Elijah said, voice dropping into the icy, measured cadence he used in cross-examination. "You have detained me without reasonable articulable suspicion after I provided you with a means to verify my identity and residence. You are escalating a non-violent encounter. You are violating my civil rights on my own property. Save it for the judge, buddy." Brennan grabbed him by the bicep and spun him around roughly. 2 more porch lights had come on. Next door, the Carters stood in their bathrobes at the edge of their driveway, watching with the morbid curiosity of people who believed themselves safely outside the story. The humiliation landed on Elijah's shoulders like physical weight. He was a man whose reputation and integrity were his most valuable assets. Now he was being displayed in front of his wealthy neighbors like a thief caught in the act. Brennan patted him down with rough, unnecessary force. "Where's your weapon?" "I don't have a weapon. Check the briefcase if you want." "I'll search what I want when I want." Having found nothing, Brennan grabbed the chain between the cuffs and shoved him toward the steps. "Walk, we're going to the cruiser." Elijah planted his feet. He didn't struggle, but he made his body rigid. "I'm not walking anywhere until you verify my identity." "I said move!" Brennan shoved again. When Elijah still didn't budge, the officer reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo. I have one non-compliant suspect in custody at 442 Cedar Crest Drive. requesting a supervisor to my location. The radio crackled acknowledgement. Supervisor en route? You're going to regret this, Brennan, Elijah said quietly, looking out at the flashing lights painting his lawn. When your supervisor gets here, your career as you know it ends tonight. Brennan gave a breathless, arrogant laugh. Sure thing, pal. You guys always have a story. First you're the homeowner, then you're the DA. What's next? You own the police department? Elijah's eyes narrowed in the glare of the spotlight. Actually, he said, I do. The standoff on the lawn lasted 4 minutes that felt like 4 hours. Brennan stood slightly behind him, holding the cuff chain tight, chest puffed out while the neighbors watched from the safety of their property lines. Elijah stood perfectly still, mind racing not with fear, but with cold, terrifying clarity. This was not simply an eager rookie making a mistake. This was a symptom of the exact rot he had sworn to cut out when he ran for office. For months, he had been quietly reviewing a pattern of racial profiling and excessive force complaints coming out of the 4th Precinct, Brennan's precinct. Being subjected to it himself was more than personal insult. It was living evidence. A second siren wailed in the distance. A large black police SUV came hard around the corner of the cul-de-sac and screeched to a stop behind Brennan's cruiser. The doors flew open. Sergeant Thomas Harlan stepped out of the passenger side. 25 years on the job, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, thick mustache, the kind of hard-nosed veteran who had sat across conference tables from Elijah Brooks a dozen times in the past 6 months, hammering out plea deals, warrant protocols, and departmental budgets. What have we got here, Brennan? Harlan shouted, slamming the door and coming up the driveway fast. Dispatch said you had a struggle with a prowler. No struggle, Sarge, Brennan called back, voice bright with pride. Caught him trying to break into the front door. He gave me some lip, refused to walk to the car, claimed he lives here. Even tried to tell me he was the district attorney. Brennan chuckled. Nut job. Harlan walked past the spotlight, stepped into the ambient porch light, and pulled a heavy tactical flashlight from his belt. He clicked it on and lit the suspect's face. The beam hit Elijah full on. Elijah didn't blink. He simply looked straight at the sergeant. Good evening, Tom, he said, voice smooth, steady, and devastatingly calm. Sergeant Harlan stopped dead. The flashlight beam trembled against the brick wall behind Elijah. The color drained from the veteran's face so fast he looked like he might pass out on the spot. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Elijah's face, then down at the steel cuffs cutting into the wrists behind his back, then at the bruised, rumpled state of the tailored shirt. Sarge? Brennan asked, noticing the sudden silence. You want me to throw him in the back? Brennan. Harlan's voice came out hollow, stripped of all its usual authority. Take the cuffs off him. Brennan blinked. What? Sarge, he's a burglary suspect. Mrs. Ellison called him in. I said take the goddamn cuffs off him right now. The roar tore through the quiet neighborhood like a gunshot. Brennan physically jumped. Harlan took 3 massive strides, shoved the younger officer aside, and fumbled for the universal handcuff key on his own belt. His hands shook so hard he dropped it on the first try. He scooped it up, moved behind Elijah, and jammed the key into the locks. Mr. Brooks, Elijah, Jesus Christ! The ratchets released. The cold steel fell away. Elijah brought his arms forward slowly and rubbed the deep red indentations already forming on his wrists. He did not look at Harlan. He turned his gaze deliberately toward Officer Kyle Brennan. Brennan stood frozen on the steps, eyes darting between his sergeant and the man he had just assaulted and mocked. The smug aggression had evaporated, replaced by pure, undiluted panic. Sarge, what's going on? Who is this? Harlan's voice was a furious hiss. You stupid son of a bitch, you just arrested Elijah Brooks, the district attorney of Westchester County. The words hit Brennan like a physical blow. He staggered half a step. His mouth fell open. He looked at the mansion, at the expensive briefcase still on the mat, and finally at the black man standing in front of him, the man he had physically handled and publicly humiliated. Mr. Brooks, I got a call about a prowler. You were in the dark. I was just following protocol. Protocol? Elijah spoke the single word with the force of a gavel. Both officers flinched. He bent down, picked up the briefcase, set it on the porch railing, popped the latches, and took out his wallet. He flipped it open, revealing the gold prosecutor's badge and his New York driver's license, and held it out toward Brennan. "I told you exactly who I was. I told you I lived here. I offered to show you this identification. Instead of investigating, instead of doing your job, you chose to escalate. You used excessive force on a compliant citizen. You detained me unlawfully." He turned to Harlan. "Tom, you and I both know this isn't isolated. I've been reading the complaint files on the 4th Precinct for 6 months. I've been looking for the reason use of force complaints against minorities in this sector are up 300%. He looked back at Brennan, eyes hard. "Tonight, Officer Brennan was kind enough to give me a front-row seat to the problem." "Elijah, please," Harlan pleaded, taking off his uniform hat and running a hand through his gray hair. "He's a rookie. He's an idiot. Let me handle this internally. I'll suspend him tonight. I'll take his badge myself." "No, Tom, you won't handle this internally, because the days of the 4th Precinct investigating itself are officially over." Elijah turned his back on both officers, walked to the stone planter, retrieved the spare key, and slid it into the lock. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing the warm, luxurious foyer beyond. He paused in the doorway and looked back over his shoulder. The flashing lights were still painting the neighborhood red and blue. The neighbors were still watching. "Officer Brennan," he called into the night, "I suggest you call your union representative. And Sergeant Harlan, tell the Chief of Police I expect him in my office at 8:10 a.m. sharp on Monday. If he's late, I'm sending the State Police Special Investigations Unit to raid your precinct." He stepped inside and shut the door with a solid, final thud, leaving the 2 cops standing in the cold silence of Cedar Crest Estates, suddenly aware they had started a war they could not win. Monday morning arrived like a sledgehammer. The Westchester County District Attorney's Office, on the top floor of the brutalist concrete courthouse in downtown White Plains, was usually a controlled storm of activity. Today, it was deathly quiet. Word of Friday night had leaked through the precinct whisper network and spread like wildfire through the legal community. Elijah sat behind his massive mahogany desk in a charcoal 3-piece suit, tie perfectly knotted, looking every bit the apex predator of the county's legal system. The bruising on his wrists was hidden beneath crisp, white French cuffs, but the dull ache remained, a constant physical reminder of the indignity. At exactly 8:10 a.m., the heavy glass doors swung open. His lead investigator, Frank Delgado, a seasoned former state trooper, stepped in, followed by Chief of Police Vincent Malloy. Malloy was a political survivor with 30 years of navigating the treacherous waters of New York municipal politics. Today, the signature smile was gone. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. "Elijah," Malloy began, stepping into the office and extending a hand. "I cannot even begin to tell you how deeply sorry I am about Friday night. It was an aberration, a complete breakdown of protocol by a rookie who had no business being on that patrol alone." Elijah did not stand. He did not take the offered hand. He simply stared until Malloy awkwardly lowered his arm and sat in one of the leather guest chairs. "Let's skip the apologies, Vincent. We both know you aren't sorry it happened. You're sorry it happened to me. If I'd been an accountant or a high school teacher or delivery driver, I would have spent the weekend in a holding cell fighting a fabricated resisting arrest charge." Malloy sighed and rubbed his temples. "I've already taken Brennan's badge and gun. He's on unpaid administrative leave pending termination. Sergeant Harlan has been formally reprimanded for failing to control his subordinate. I'm serving you the heads on a silver platter. Let's issue a joint press release about retraining and put this ugly mess behind us. We have the Bellini organized crime trial starting in 3 weeks. We need a united front. A united front." Elijah leaned back. "That's an interesting phrase. Tell me, Vincent, how united is the 4th Precinct?" Malloy frowned. "What are you getting at?" "This morning at 6:10 a.m., Frank submitted a formal evidentiary request for Officer Brennan's body camera footage from Friday night. Care to guess what the response was?" Malloy shifted. "I was briefed on the way over. There was a malfunction. Brennan's camera was damaged during his previous shift and failed to upload. It's unfortunate, but we don't need it." We have Harlan's testimony and we have yours. Open and shut case of insubordination. A malfunction. A dark, humorless smile crossed Elijah's face. He pressed a button on his desk console. Motorized blinds descended, plunging the office into shadow. A large flat screen on the far wall flared to life. I knew the body cam footage would miraculously disappear. It always does when your boy's in the fourth overstep. But what Brennan didn't realize is that my home security system isn't some off-the-shelf brand. It's a custom array installed by a private firm out of Manhattan. It records in 4K with crystal-clear audio and uploads in real time to a secure off-site cloud server. Malloy's face went pale. Elijah clicked the remote. The screen showed the exact moment he knelt by the stone planter. The audio was pristine, crickets, rustling leaves, the low approach of the cruiser. But the video didn't begin with the spotlight. It began 30 seconds earlier. Night vision cameras clearly captured Brennan's cruiser idling at the end of the driveway. Inside the dark cabin, the highly sensitive parabolic microphone on Elijah's porch picked up the conversation with startling clarity. Dispatch 4 Bravo, I see the suspect. Male, black, dark clothing, prowling near the front door of the Brooks residence. A pause. Then a second voice. Not dispatch, but someone on a private tactical frequency. Copy that, Brennan. Ellison called it in. She wants him gone. You know the drill. Make it hurt. Scare him off the block. We don't want his kind thinking they own the place. Copy you, Nightwatch. Moving in. The video then showed the blinding spotlight, followed by the brutal, unprovoked slam against the brick wall. Chief Malloy stared at the screen, mouth slightly open, color completely gone. That second voice, Elijah said, tone lethal, belongs to Officer Derek Sloan, a 12-year veteran of your force. And he wasn't talking on the official channel. He was using a tactical sub-frequency. Elijah leaned forward, elbows on the desk. This wasn't a rookie making a mistake, Vincent. This was a coordinated, premeditated assault. Make it hurt. We don't want his kind thinking they own the place. They didn't know I was the homeowner. They thought I was just some black man in the wrong zip code, and they were executing an unwritten policy to terrorize me out of the neighborhood. Elijah, I swear to God I didn't know about any night watch. I've never heard of it in my life. I believe you, because if I thought you knew, you'd be wearing handcuffs right now. But ignorance is not a defense. The rot is deep, and I'm going to gut your department to find it. What do you want? Malloy's voice was barely a whisper. I want the server logs for every sub-frequency communication in the 4th Precinct for the last 3 years. I want the unredacted personnel files of every officer assigned to Cedar Crest Estates, and I want them by noon. If I don't have them, I will call a press conference at 12:01 p.m., play this video for the national media, and formally request the Department of Justice place the Westchester County Police Department under a federal consent decree. Malloy swallowed hard. A federal consent decree would mean the FBI taking over management of his force. It would end his career, his pension, and his legacy. You'll have the files, he said, standing on shaky legs. But Elijah, you're opening Pandora's box. The Union will go to war with you. They'll paralyze the city. Let them try. They started the war on my front porch. I intend to finish it in my courtroom. By Wednesday afternoon, the district attorney's office had been transformed into a war room. Whiteboards covered the walls, connecting dispatch logs, 911 transcripts, and financial records with red string. Elijah had called in a major favor from Albany and brought in Special Agent Nathaniel Crow of the New York State Police Special Investigations Unit. Crow was a forensic accountant and digital forensics specialist who had spent his career dismantling corrupt municipal governments. Quiet, meticulous, he lived for the data. You were right, Crow said, walking in with a thick red-tabbed binder and dropping it on the mahogany desk. Brennan and Sloan weren't just a couple of rogue racists with badges. It's an enterprise, an organized, monetized enterprise. Elijah looked up from his laptop and took a sip of black, room-temperature coffee. Walk me through it, Nate. Crow opened the binder. We pulled the cell records for Officer Brennan, Officer Sloan, and 6 other patrolmen in the 4th. They all used an encrypted messaging app to communicate off the grid. Brennan, being the arrogant rookie he is, backed his phone up to the cloud. The encryption keys were compromised the second the backup hit the servers. We subpoenaed the data. He flipped to screenshots of text messages. They call themselves the Night Watch. About a dozen officers. Primary function: keeping the undesirables out of Westchester's wealthiest subdivisions. Cedar Crest Estates, Pine Valley, the waterfront properties along the Hudson. Elijah read the transcripts. The language was vile. Casual racial slurs, bragging about unconstitutional stops, fabricated probable cause, physical intimidation. But what caught his eye was the transactional nature of the messages. "Look at this one," he said, pointing with a gold pen. "The Ellison account just cleared. 5,000 into the widow's fund. Drinks are on me tonight." "Exactly," Crow said. "That's the twist. This isn't just ideological racism. It's a paid service." He pulled up a financial flow chart on the projector. "We dug into Margaret Ellison, your friendly neighborhood HOA president. She manages a private discretionary fund for the Cedar Crest Homeowners Association. On paper, it's listed as private security and landscaping enhancements. We followed the money. Over the last 4 years, the HOA has funneled more than $250,000 into the Westchester Police Widows and Orphans charity." "A charity?" Elijah frowned. "That's a legitimate 501c3. How are they getting the money back to the officers?" "Because the charity is a shell. The board of directors consists entirely of retired 4th Precinct cops. They take the donations from wealthy white neighborhoods like yours, wash it through the charity, and pay it out to the Night Watch officers as off-duty security consulting fees and performance bonuses. It's a beautifully constructed bribery ring. The wealthy residents pay the cops under the table to act as their personal, heavily armed bouncers, keeping minorities out of their neighborhoods." Elijah felt a cold sickness settle in his stomach. The magnitude was staggering. It wasn't a few bad apples. The entire orchard was poisoned. Margaret Ellison, the sweet older woman who grew prize-winning hydrangeas across the street, was essentially paying a hit squad to terrorize people of color who dared enter her zip code. "And she called me in specifically," he said softly. "We pulled the 911 tape. She told dispatch there was a suspicious, threatening-looking urban male casing your property. She knew exactly who you were, Elijah. You've lived there 2 years. She sees you get your mail every day. She didn't call the police because she thought you were a burglar. She called them because she wanted to send you a message. She weaponized the police against you." Elijah stood and walked to the window overlooking the sprawling mix of corporate towers and working-class neighborhoods that made up White Plains and the surrounding county. He had sworn an oath to protect all of them. "We have enough for RICO," he said, voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Bribery, extortion, civil rights violations under color of law, wire fraud." "We do," Crow agreed. "But if we indict 12 cops and the presidents of 3 major HOAs, the police union is going to launch a nuclear strike on your office. They'll claim this is a political witch hunt by a black DA with a vendetta. They'll leak to the press. They'll strike. They'll let crime spike just to pressure the county executive into firing you." "Let them strike," Elijah said, turning back, eyes burning with uncompromising fire. "Draft the arrest warrants, Nate. All of them. Ellison, Brennan, Sloan, the retired cops running the charity. I want every last one of them." "Who's going to sign the warrants? Half the judges in this county play golf with the HOA presidents. Judge Samuel Whitaker. He's a strict constitutionalist. He doesn't play politics, and he despises dirty cops more than he despises defense attorneys." Crow nodded, packing up the binder. "When do we move?" "Friday night, exactly 1 week after they put me in cuffs. I want the state police tactical units assembled by 9:50 p.m. We hit the 4th Precinct during shift change to catch the Night Watch together, and we send a separate squad to Cedar Crest Estates." Elijah looked down at his wrists. The bruising had faded to a sickly yellow, but the memory of cold steel was permanently etched into him. "Mrs. Ellison is going to find out exactly what it feels like to have the sanctuary of her home breached in the middle of the night," he whispered. "Prepare the indictments." The storm was fully gathered, and Elijah Brooks was about to unleash it on the untouchables of Westchester County. The sky over the county tore open just after sunset on Friday. unleashing a torrential freezing rain that turned the streets slick and black. In an abandoned warehouse district 2 miles from the 4th Precinct, 4 unmarked armored tactical vehicles sat idling in the dark. Inside, 30 highly trained agents of the New York State Police Special Investigations Unit, clad in heavy Kevlar and carrying suppressed submachine guns, checked their gear in absolute silence. Special Agent Nathaniel Crow stood at the front of the lead transport, eyes on his illuminated waterproof watch. It read 9:50 p.m. "Listen up," his voice cracked over the encrypted channel. "In 15 minutes, the 4th Precinct undergoes its shift change. The men we are targeting will be in the locker room or the motor pool. These are armed, trained police officers who believe they are above the law. You do not give them an inch. You do not let them reach for their duty belts. Shock and awe by the numbers. We are executing federal RICO warrants. Nobody walks out of that building in a uniform." 5 miles away, in the manicured, silent streets of Cedar Crest Estates, a different kind of trap was being set. Elijah sat in the back of a blacked-out SUV parked 3 houses down from Margaret Ellison's sprawling colonial. Rain drummed a heavy, relentless rhythm against the tinted glass. Beside him sat 2 state police agents, eyes fixed on the illuminated windows of the Ellison residence. Inside, Margaret was hosting a small, elite gathering of the Homeowners Association board, sipping imported Pinot Noir, completely oblivious to the hammer about to fall. At exactly 9:55 p.m., Elijah's phone vibrated. A single text from Crow. "Execute." "Go," Elijah said softly to the driver. The SUV surged forward, tires hissing on the wet asphalt, and pulled abruptly into Margaret Ellison's circular driveway. Simultaneously, 2 more unmarked vehicles boxed in the perimeter. 8 agents poured out into the driving rain, moving with terrifying, orchestrated precision. They didn't bother looking for a spare key. The heavy steel battering ram shattered the lock of the custom mahogany front door and blew it off its hinges. The sound echoed through the wealthy neighborhood like a cannon shot. "State police! Search warrant! Nobody move!" Inside the formal living room, glasses shattered against the hardwood. Margaret Ellison, draped in an elegant silk cardigan, let out a piercing shriek as heavily armed agents flooded her home. The 3 other board members, wealthy executives and local socialites, froze in terror, hands shooting into the air. "What is the meaning of this?" Margaret screeched, face flushing a deep mottled red. "Do you know who I am? I will have your badges for this. Get out of my house." "Margaret Ellison." A calm, deep voice cut through the chaos. The agents parted slightly. Elijah Brooks stepped through the ruined doorway, casually shaking rain from his dark trench coat. He walked into the living room, leather dress shoes crunching over shattered glass from expensive wine goblets, and stopped a few feet from the trembling HOA president. Margaret's jaw dropped. The arrogance that usually masked her features evaporated into utter confusion, then slowly dawning horror. "Elijah, Mr. Brooks, what are you doing? Tell these men to leave." "I can't do that, Margaret." He pulled a folded, water-resistant document from his coat pocket and held it out. She was shaking too hard to take it. It fluttered to the floor at her feet. "That is a federal indictment. You are being charged under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act for bribery, extortion, and wire fraud." "Bribery?" she gasped, clutching her chest. "This is absurd. This is a witch hunt because of that little misunderstanding last week." $250,000 funneled through a fake police charity to fund a racist rogue hit squad is not a misunderstanding, Margaret. You paid armed men to terrorize your own neighbors. You weaponized the badge to keep this neighborhood looking the way you wanted it to. He nodded to the lead agent. "Cuff her." "No, wait, you can't," Margaret screamed as a female agent stepped forward, grabbed her wrists, and wrenched them behind her back. The sharp metallic ratcheting of the handcuffs filled the room, the exact same sound Elijah had endured on his own porch exactly 7 days earlier. "You're ruining this neighborhood," she spat, tears of rage streaking her makeup as she was marched toward the door. "You don't belong here." "I belong exactly where I am, Mrs. Ellison," Elijah said coldly, watching her being paraded out into the rain. "The district attorney's office. Take her away." Meanwhile, Absolute pandemonium had erupted at the 4th Precinct. Agent Crow and 30 tactical operatives breached the side and rear entrances simultaneously. They flooded the locker room just as Officer Derek Sloan was unbuttoning his uniform shirt, laughing with Detective Anthony Russo, the union representative. "Hands in the air! Do it now!" Crow bellowed, weapon raised. Sloan instinctively reached for his Glock resting on the bench. Before his fingers could even brush the polymer grip, 2 agents tackled him to the concrete floor, driving a knee hard between his shoulder blades. "Hey, we're cops! We're on the same side!" Russo shouted, raising his hands, face pale with shock. "Not anymore," Crow snarled, stepping over the struggling Sloan. In the precinct bullpen, the night watch was dismantled piece by piece. 8 officers were disarmed, forced to their knees, and handcuffed in front of their horrified, uninvolved colleagues. Chief Vincent Malloy, who had rushed down from his office at the sound of the shouting, stood at the top of the stairs, utterly paralyzed as he watched his department being physically taken apart by the state police. They dragged Officer Kyle Brennan out of the briefing room. He was sobbing openly, the tough guy facade completely shattered by the reality of federal prison time looming over him. By midnight, the Westchester County holding cells were full of men in blue uniforms and wealthy socialites in designer clothing, all stripped of their belts, their shoelaces, and their power. Monday morning brought a media firestorm unlike anything the county had ever seen. National news networks descended on White Plains. The story was a devastating combination of class warfare, racial profiling, and police corruption. As predicted, the police union attempted to retaliate. Detective Russo, acting as union mouthpiece, threatened a blue flu, a coordinated mass sick-out that would leave the county defenseless. He stood on the courthouse steps shouting to reporters that Elijah Brooks was a radical anti-police vigilante conducting a personal vendetta. But Elijah was always 3 moves ahead. He didn't respond with rhetoric. He responded with the devastating, unassailable weight of evidence. And he saved his ultimate twist for a live televised press conference at 2:10 p.m. Standing behind a podium flanked by Special Agent Crow and a visibly defeated Chief Malloy, Elijah addressed the sea of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. "The police union has claimed that the arrests made on Friday were a political stunt," he began, voice echoing powerfully through the microphones. "They have threatened to abandon their posts and leave this county vulnerable. But they are operating under the false assumption that the night watch was merely a local extortion ring. It was not." The room fell dead silent. The air hummed with tension. Over the weekend, state police forensic accountants breached the safety deposit boxes held by the fraudulent Westchester Police Widows and Orphans charity. Elijah continued, pulling up a slide on the massive screen behind him that displayed a complex web of financial wire transfers. While Margaret Ellison and the homeowners associations were indeed paying these corrupt officers to harass minorities, the charity was receiving a secondary, far larger stream of income, millions of dollars. He paused, letting the silence stretch before delivering the killing blow. Those funds originated from shell companies controlled by Marco Bellini. A collective gasp swept through the press corps. The Bellini organized crime syndicate was the most feared, deeply entrenched mafia family in the New York metropolitan area. It was the very syndicate Elijah had been working 80-hour weeks to prosecute. Marco Bellini, Elijah explained, eyes sweeping across the cameras, owns 3 multi-million-dollar properties in Cedar Crest Estates and Pine Valley. They are used as safe houses and staging grounds for narcotics distribution. The night watch officers weren't just keeping people of color out of wealthy neighborhoods. They were acting as a privately funded, heavily armed perimeter guard for the Bellini family. The officers took HOA money to look like aggressive neighborhood watchmen, but they took mob money to ensure no other law enforcement agencies ever looked closely at those specific streets. The revelation was earth-shattering. The union's threat of a strike collapsed instantly. No officer wanted to be associated with an organization that was actively on the payroll of the region's most violent drug traffickers. Within 48 hours, the dominoes fell. Officer Kyle Brennan, terrified of the men he had unknowingly been protecting for the mob, broke immediately. He signed a comprehensive plea deal agreeing to testify against Officer Sloan, the corrupt charity board, and the Bellini family in exchange for a reduced sentence in a protective custody facility. Officer Derek Sloan, the arrogant architect of the night watch, refused to speak. He was eventually convicted on 14 federal counts, including RICO violations and conspiracy to distribute narcotics. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Margaret Ellison's trial became the social event of the year. Stripped of her wealth, which was seized under asset forfeiture laws, and abandoned by her high society friends, she was a shell of her former self. Her defense attorneys argued she had no idea about the mob connection, which was true, but it did not absolve her of the racist extortion ring she had proudly funded. Judge Samuel Whitaker, staring down from the bench with absolute disgust, sentenced the 72-year-old to 5 years in a minimum security federal camp. Chief Vincent Malloy resigned in disgrace, forfeiting his pension to avoid obstruction of justice charges. The Bellini trial, bolstered by the irrefutable financial evidence found in the dirty cop's accounts, ended with a sweeping victory for the district attorney's office. Marco Bellini and his top lieutenants were put away for life. Their suburban fortresses were seized and auctioned off by the state, 6 months after the rainy Friday night that changed everything. Elijah Brooks pulled his black sedan into his driveway at Cedar Crest Estates. It was 6:15 p.m., a reasonable hour. The neighborhood was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the silence of fear or exclusion. It was just a neighborhood. His wife Claire stood on the front porch holding a steaming mug of tea, smiling as he walked up the stone path. There was no spare key hidden under the planter anymore. There was no need for one. Elijah walked up the steps unburdened by the weight of a broken system. He had looked into the darkest, most entrenched corners of institutional corruption, and he had not blinked. They had tried to put him in chains to remind him of his place. Instead, he had used those very chains to drag their entire corrupt empire into the blinding light of justice. He kissed his wife, walked through his front door, and finally, truly, came home.